It's December the 5th, 2021. December the 5th, 2021. Welcome, everybody. If you had a good weekend, the crazies never stop. I'm not sure why the nuclear industry feels it's got to be insane, but...
He knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Yeah, I suppose we all thought that way one way or another. Evil mothers for nuclear in Germany. They're the wives of the guys who brought humanity. The A-10 Warthog only shoots depleted uranium munitions. Dirty bombs. And it can shoot 1.5 tons a minute. Hope everybody's having a reasonable day. Before we jump into it, we're always into it. Before we dive into it, what is Fukushima? Because that topic is going to come up a lot. And Fukushima, yeah, the USS Ronald Reagan was a mile away from the nuclear meltdowns as they were happening. They all got sick. Their watches, digital watches, all stopped at the same time. And they were all denied compensation. Even the people who lived at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for 75 years, they've asked for medical support. Not for compensation, but for medical support from all kinds of illnesses. And for 75 years, the nuclear industry refuses. Their actual statement on the sickness in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was there was none. Because the people at the nuclear meltdowns or the nuclear detonations wouldn't have inhaled enough radioactivity to matter. They only study them now for 75 years, 76 years, for external radiation, not internal. And that does show you this compartmentalized industry, death cult and secret society. You can't call it an industry. Unless murder is an industry, I suppose. So Fukushima, a popular one is Reactor 4. Now in comparison, this is 100 times the size of Chernobyl. But at the top of the building, unlike Chernobyl, which was a new reactor, it was 800 tons. These reactors Chernobyl was 200 tons. These are 800 tons. Chernobyl was mostly graphite. These are pure uranium plutonium, not cesium, not iodine. Pure uranium, pure plutonium. They had 40 years of reactor cores stored at the top of the buildings because you don't have a repository anywhere. And they were actually designed to store the life of it because they knew there was no way they were going to have a repository in the future. So they designed the pools to accommodate the whole lifespan of the reactors. They've done that symmetrically worldwide. They don't want a repository because the fuel pools, by the way, they lost all of them. but they're pretending that it looks like this. So is that confusing for you? It actually looks like that. But all the media worldwide, nobody's challenged it, have said it looks like this. I've tweeted this out to Greenpeace, saying all you gotta do is tweet out and say that the media is not inside the fuel pool, and you can bring this whole conspiracy to its knees because they have a lot of tension, right? But it turns out that Greenpeace is actually controlled opposition. And so what they done was, we don't know if these pictures of people there is real. It's they're in paper suits for starters, unless it's homeless. That's what's left of reactor 4, but there's multiple nuclear reactors that have melted down all around here. So nuclear scientists have never went there. And what they're going to do is they use cranes to construct this. It was built off site and brought here. And you can see they're putting panels on it. They do that with the cranes. You can see the cranes are everywhere. And before they got the cover on the building, you can see the damage. Now this was a 190-foot building. It was actually taller than what's there now. And once again, what they got there is just tubes with panelings on it. And then they pretended that they're in the fuel pool. So this is a problem. Why is nuclear doing that?
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
So it's obvious they're not even in Japan. That's a lethal dose to go near the building to your left. We've seen pictures like this from TEPCO, the operators show up. That would be a lethal dose. And you always see these perfect paper suits with no dirt on them, no tears into them, no tools. And it's impossible to go inside the building or even close to the building. It's a lethal dose. So this is what the building looked like before they got the panels on. Once they got the panels on, they pretended it looked like that. And this was the whole scam. You can see it right there. And then the actual final results look like that. So they put covers on it on the back of the building. You can see all this debris. Now, they didn't clean it up because that's a lethal dose. You can't get near it. They couldn't get into the control rooms for 7 years, which are far away from the reactors. But yet they're there and the building is perfect. So this was the only picture we ever got, was this wide picture. And you were able to zoom in on Reactor 4 and Reactor 3. And to my horror, you can see there is no integrity. It can't possibly look like that or like this. And they've done the same thing with Reactor 4 to Reactor 3. And they pretended that they got all the fuel out of the buildings. That's fascinating because the media worldwide had done that. So it looks just like a normal construction site. And going this close to it, as you could, if you stay there for 20 minutes, your organs will start to melt and you probably die that day or that week. There's no way to survive it. So you couldn't go into the control room for 7 years, but you're into a nuclear meltdown. This is Arnie Gunnarsson and his wife. They're pretending, now I put these two pictures there, but they're pretending the building looks like that and not like this. And the significance of it is that Arnie had made the assemblies for the fuel pools, which are at the very top of the building where I have him placed right now, and that's missing, which means the reactor is missing too, of course. But in his own words,
now, the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
So if he doesn't know that the fuel pools are not there, who would?
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
Right. Ernie. So therefore, we got a poll tonight that's asking the question, should nuclear scientists' parents be jailed for creating monsters? We got a 94% says yes. I mean, this is a no-brainer, right? So is Arnie Gunnarsson a monster for doing that, pretending that the fuel pool is there? Because he made the assemblies for the exact same reactors and exact same fuel pools. Radiation is streaming into the atmosphere after that pool boiled dry. The worst case was 250 kilometers could be an evacuation zone if the fuel in spent fuel pool number 4 melted. Well, when you look at the building there, it's obviously melted and detonated and disappeared and everything else. Okay, so now we're going to jump to the story, the headlines in a minute. Just want you to get the details now. David Suzuki had said that now I put these two pictures there to articulate what he's talking about, that if number 4 collapsed, you would have to evacuate Japan. And that the west coast of North America should also be evacuated. Let's play that clip very quick for you. What you think?
3 out of the 4 plants were destroyed in the earthquake and in the tsunami. The 4th one has been so badly damaged that the fear is if there's another earthquake of a 7 or above, that building will go, and then all hell breaks loose. I have seen a paper which says that if, in fact, the 4th plant goes under an earthquake and those rods are exposed, it's bye-bye Japan, and everybody on the west coast of North America should evacuate. Now, if that isn't terrifying, I don't know what. Fukushima is the most terrifying situation I can imagine.
And Commissioner Arnie, okay, so they didn't fake that because they were bored. That's 2 reactors that had melted down and lost their fuel pools with reactor cores in it. Each of them dwarfs Chernobyl. This is reactor 1. It also melted down, blew up, caught fire, blew up, and melted down. And this is reactor 2 to the left. It also blew up and caught fire, and blew up and melted down. It's reactor 3 and 4. It's reactor 3. All the evidence is overwhelming, incredibly overwhelming, that what I'm saying is obvious. So then the world sat in silence and in fact went right along with the cover story. That's pretending it's reactor 3 on top of a building that looked like this. They put the walls around it, they built it off site, and then pretended that they were in a fuel pool. But if you look at engineering or anything, you know that the world is insane, because the world came out and helped tell that lie. And so you can't turn your universities, because they're the schools of mass destruction. They help perpetrate the lies. You can't turn to your media. Obviously, they were captured somewhere along the way. And so was the regulators and key positions in governments. So therefore, we need a public awakening. And we need the family to denounce the nuclear scientist, nuclear academic world for their silence and for their complicity. Now, the sad things about all of this is, besides dirty bombs, now this Dr. Robert ZUBRIN, he's the author of this story, allegedly. And it's most likely Michael Schellenberg with the story, and he put his name on it. But he's extremely influential, extremely educated, unbelievably articulated, incredibly well positioned. He's been in tons and tons and tons of documentaries. He has the Mars Foundations to send people to Mars. And so he has just incredible abilities, right? So why take a job being a scumbag is a really intriguing question when you think about it. He could have done anything in life and been successful at it because he's already proven that he's able to get all kinds of degrees and he's able to function in the society. He's like a serial killer. He looks normal, but he's completely not. He said the current green anti-human movement, green. So if you're green, you're anti-human. Think about that statement. Willing to stab you in the back on the drop of a hat, I bet you. He's a shark circling our loved ones. He wants to send your loved ones to Mars for some sick jollies. He shows us a picture of a nuclear plant, a Goldfish nuclear plant in France. I looked it up because I'm curious type of a guy. And surrounded by farms. Why would you surround your nuclear power plants with farms, I asked myself. What a better way is there to poison everybody, Dana? Said the big bad wolf, a.k.a. Dr. Robert. So this is pretty wild. Why would you do that? Well, it turns out it's not unusual at all. They're doing it. Almost all nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. So all nuclear power plants have fuel pools where they put the reactor cores. And they're in water. They boil off about 120,000 liters of water each day, and each liter is billions or trillions of atoms, anthropogenic man-made atoms. And the food sucks it up. We have these studies and we could prove this stuff. Bear with me. Obviously, I was slacking today. I never had that ready to go. I'm preoccupied. Oh, we have it. Just to establish the patterns. So we know that the grapevines, log grapevines, foliage, uptake of grapevines. 134 cesium, 85 strontium. You've seen similar in strawberries. So it's not just grapes, it's also strawberries and wheat, tomato plants. And it's sucked up through rain, helped liberate it into the environment. Accumulations of radionuclide by plants as a monitor system. So we know potatoes and fruit plants and everything else will suck up radiation. You know where I'm going with all this, I hope, anyway. So then the question remains is, that's the plant that he had pictured, his wonderful plants, right? But what we've seen is nuclear power plants worldwide are doing this. They're poisoning it. Everybody who eats this food ends up poisoned. Your children, your friends, your loved ones. Everybody you feed this to, you're poisoning them. It's murder. And radiation as a toxin is 1 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. So even new nuclear power plants like this one here in the United Kingdom is modeled in farmland. It's a genocidal murderous industry. Hence Dr. Robert. playing the good guy when he's actually the last thing. He's everything but a good guy. The past few weeks have seen a radical change in the outlook for nuclear energy. Snap a finger in a moment of time, really. Coincidence with the global CO2 zombie apocalypse we have each year. The Constipated Party 26 conference. Major center-left forces have shifted their positions from opposition to support. So you got your left and your right and your far left, your far right, your extreme left, your extreme right, your nihilistic left, Pol Pot, Mao, right? You got, they keep you divided with that narrative 100%. Well, like, what is global warming and climate change and net zero and carbon footprint, Dana? I'm glad you asked. I was waiting. I wasn't expecting it, but just in case, I was queued up, ready to go. Meet the father of global warming, Dr. Stephen Edwards. Or how about Professor Miles Allen, the man behind net zero? And who but brought us the carbon footprint? And how do we make your footprint smaller? The idea of a personal carbon footprint was popularized by an advertising campaign from a fossil fuel company, BP, in 2005. And they blame it all on you. So it was a distraction from what they were doing, right? Look over here. Don't look over there. This is Fukushima fallout. They've done the same thing. They had a big campaign. It started in 2015. It's called the Paris Accord. And blah, blah, blah. So James Hansen is the father of climate change. He's 99% confident that global warming was caused by the accumulation of greenhouse gases, not a random fluctuation. And so Hansen's testimony was pivotal in the history of the global climate change. Oh, and it marked the official beginning of the global climate change debate. So you had James Hansen was the father of climate change. Edwards is the father of global warming. Miles is the father of net zero. And BP Oil is the father of the carbon footprint. And they will get it smaller. Make no mistake about it. If you got to kill every one of us. So Dr. Robert is part of that kookiness. Unfortunately, it's disturbing, really, because he's everywhere, you know. Well, a year ago, French president was called for cutting the nuclear fraction of France's electrical power from its current 75%, which 70% of France's fresh water goes to nuclear, by the way, because they need 1 million gallons a minute, right? Thereby eliminating the world's only actually decarbonized major electric power grid. Well, actually, France gets its uranium from Niger. So 65 years ago, they caused a civil war in Niger that's still going on today. They destroyed every single family in the country. Every family in the country, they exploit the uranium in Niger. The mining history is therefore strongly linked to France in great demand for uranium to supply its carbon-free nuclear fleet. And French, of course, done 190 plus nuclear weapons in the Pacific. French nuclear tests exposed the entire Polynesian population to brutal, permanent numbers, too, of radiation. A new study recently revealed. Even the Sahara dust is radioactive from France, ends up blown back to France and every other country in between. France must clean up the Algerian nuclear test sites. France's carbon-free history is nothing but carbon-intensive history. What a horrible thing they've done to Algerians, and they won't even tell them where they buried it all. And they got 6 reactors they found with brutal defective welding. Doesn't get worse than that. And they got to pass out millions of iodine tablets so everybody can go back to sleep. Cesium bioaccumulates in your thyroid glands too, by the way. Your thyroid gland will take it and turn it into a hormone, a radioactive hormone. So particularly for children, it's the worst thing could happen to them. The new nuclear moment. Archive our objectives, in particular carbon neutrality. This is a few months ago, the European Union bureaucrats drawn up the taxonomy that defines which energy sources would be considered carbon-free, which is a valid substitute for fossil fuels, excluded nuclear power. Now nearly all except fanatical Germanic states have reversed themselves. Germanic being Germany. What a strange connotation, though. It's like it's a Hitlerish connotation that he put into that. You know, German has, Merkel was a nuclear physicist, or a nuclear engineer, rather. By the way, early infant mortality in West Germany before and after Chernobyl. Trends in birth and birth sex ratios in the vicinity of research reactor in Germany. So there's a higher discrepancy of males being born compared to females. That's going to be true also for the birds and insects and animal kingdom and mammal world, if that's applicable. So what you're seeing is just these low-powered research, very low-powered research reactors. You're seeing a disparity of males to females being born. So obviously that their parents were irradiated, right? Because that's how, and you have to radiate everybody to get this big of a discrepancy, you know? Human sex ratio at birth and residential proximities were also seen in nuclear facilities in France, where there's a bigger ratio of males to females. The more males, the less population, right? When you scale that right up. Evil mothers for nuclear. So they were created most likely by the Schellenberg organizations. You got many of them. Environmental Progress is one of them. There's another one we'll talk about coming up here shortly. Evil mothers for nuclear. We're seeing there's these groups showing up worldwide, and Mothers for Nuclear. This one is Mother for Nuclears in Germany. Indeed, the map of the pro and anti-nuclear countries. So there's a disconnect when you talk about a subject like this that is really unique, that's unique to nuclear from what I've seen throughout the years. So shit countries like, no offense to the population, but political-wise, Romania and Poland, France, of course. France got an unbelievable legacy and also a legacy of cowardice, unbelievable cowardice. So Fukushima radioactive fallout also has a map. It covers the whole planet. Everybody got irradiated, and that's a permanent plume. It's an endless plume that never stops. There's no breaks. It's not like a little plume out floating around, which is bad enough, trust me. It's a continuous non-stop plume. And that plume model is only good all the way up to the 31st, or that was modeled up to the 31st of March, 20 days after the nuclear meltdown started. Well, not even that, 19 days, 18 days, and 17 days, depending which reactor you're putting into the plume. But as you can see, this is a continuous plume. This is not so, like, it's absurd amount of radiation we're talking about. If you model that out to 3 months, Mothers for nuclear Germany demonstrate in Berlin to keep their nuclear reactors. And now that Merkel's gone, they'll probably put someone in the position of authority pro-nuclear and keep the reactors open. We've seen this many times, right? Even going on right now in Taiwan and South Korea, for instance. Such evil people to do what they're doing. To murder everybody in the communities around them. There's around 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses that'll happen when you get radiation in your body or your muscles, your organs, and your bones. Pulse and energy at the speed of light, 186,000 miles a second. Every second for every minute, 1,440 minutes a day. Go with nuclear power. So U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm began her tenure 10 months ago by announcing the Biden administration commitment to strangling the nuclear industry by blocking the establishment of a waste repository. What are you talking about, blocking it? But they're talking about Nevada, right? Yucca Mountain. And Yucca Mountain, of course, they spent $20 billion on litigation. Not counting everything else, but just on litigation. And Yucca Mountain is built right on a earthquake fault line, as they found out earlier this year, because we covered that. They had an earthquake there. But the problem with Yucca Mountain, another problem with Yucca Mountain, was that the calculations was how much heat can the mountain hold for 200 years. And so that was the limit that you can put inside the mountain. So what they wanted to do, they wanted to put massive air conditioners inside the mountain to extend the amount that they can put in the mountains. And then the WIP Waste Isolation Pilot Project was a I don't know, it's like what they've done on Orchard Island in Taiwan to the natives, where Taiwan nuclear industry says, hey, we want to put a salmon canning factory on some of your land. Can we lease it out off you? They're like, yeah, sure, you're the government. Why would we do that? That's a great idea. You're going to have a salmon canning factory. That's fantastic. And so Taiwan built their nuclear waste repository and pretended it was a canning factory for canning salmon. Try wrapping your mind around that. That's the nuclear industry. So whenever you see weird stuff like that, you got to look. Is the nuclear industry involved in this? This is pretty sneaky. So they said U.S. Energy Secretary Jennifer began her tenure 10 months ago by announcing the Biden administration to hack the crap out of the nuclear industry. It's simply not true, right? We are very bullish on the advanced nuclear reactors that don't exist. We had, in fact, invested a lot of money, not very much actually. And we're very supportive of it. Well, if you were, they would already exist now, wouldn't they? It may be noted that Granholm was voicing support for types of reactors that do not exist. Furthermore, she still supports the effort of the environmentalist movement to increase the cost of nuclear power and make it appear as unsafe as possible by forcing waste to be stored at power stations near cities instead of under a mountain in Nevada. Now that argument had basically disappeared about 2 years ago. That they weren't, it was already established not doing Yucca Mountain, besides being in a nuclear wasteland in Nevada, is not applicable, is not. And so what they want to put it in a community with farms, because it takes 40 or 50 years to put it there, and everything is vented. Everything is vented on the highway, on the way there. Everything is vented when it's there. It's repackaged. And so trying to say that, look, they want the nuclear fuel distributed throughout the country, because actually this is what it looks like. So you can see the fuel, high level fuel, actual reactor fuel, is distributed throughout the whole country. If you put it all together and one of them goes down, you're going to lose that part of your country. Well, you're going to lose your country, actually. So think of those green dots as a place where you get invisible snowstorms of radioactive fallout. Because that's what's going on there. Each fuel pool is hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And the closer you are within by the hundreds of miles, the worse it's going to be, because it bioaccumulates. So all the fuel in those pools, in all those places, is on purpose. You can't contain the emissions, which is radioactive fallout. It's because, like, nuclear fuel makes power by splitting the atom. That's pure energy. But that's not just the stop of it, or that's not the end of it. It's not like it just splits the atom. Now both of them are splitting atoms, and they all keep doing it. And now instead of having 2 splitting the atoms, you got 4 splitting the atoms, then you got 8 splitting atoms, then you got 16 splitting atoms. And it done all from 2 atoms. So it's a perpetual replicating machine that is coming out of the fuel. And they live for hundreds, each one of these live for 100,000 years. And it's just pumping them out all the time. They're drifting all over the planet because they're little nuclear engines pulsing at the speed of light energy. They're able to keep them, so they're extremely tiny. And they have incredible attributes where they can, think about how much, we don't have technology, as you know, that we can't make anything we claim that can go to speed of light except for radioactive pollution. That now covers the entire planet, is now a threat to all replicating cells on the planet. And so the fallout worldwide, just from one nuclear reaction, looks like that. Imagine when you add in 440 reactors that are currently on the planet, hemorrhaging out of the fuel pools for start, not counting everything else, right? We're in a lot of trouble. Nevada nuclear wasteland, by the way. And so they're not trying to come up with a solution for the fuel pools. This is worldwide. So when you add in 440 nuclear plants, then you add up all the fuel storage sites, also the dumps, the 3 decades we know about of the constant dumping into the oceans. There was, we're talking absurd amounts. In fact, by ships bringing it out and throwing it overboard and shooting it and sinking it. And all the submarines, all the dumps in the Arctic and everything else. All of us still splitting the atom into the environment. That's global warming on steroids, because it's pulsing energy at the speed of light. Because when you talk about we can't create anything that goes to the speed of light, they're not going to talk about radiation, because you might go, cling, wait, what? It pulses energy at the speed of light? What happens if I bring it in and it starts doing that inside my body for a while? Very, very bad things. When your body attacks it immediately with white blood cells and tries to build a tumor around it, that could take 40 years or 10 years, who knows, depending on every single atom you get in your body will attack it with white blood cells. So immediately you have higher white blood cell counts. But also your red blood cells now are displaced in order to create the white blood cell. And your red blood cell carries oxygen and nutrition throughout your body. And so you're going to take this with fresh white blood cells all the time. And then you're replenishing a lot of that through your spleen. And then you make white blood cells in all your joints, right? And you get some of the material you need from your pelvis, where you're mutating stem cells now, because you got radiation sequestered in your bones. well, the secretions that the stem cells need, I guess. While the pro-nuclear shift on the left seems to have surfaced overnight, the forces beyond it have been at work for some time. Yeah, we know. Michael Schellenberg and crew, right? He's the major one, though. There's a number of them out there, don't get me wrong. But he's one of the few effective ones, is what I'm trying to say. In the United States, they have been led by several groups, including the Breakthrough Institute, which is Schellenberg, and a Democratic Party think tank called the Third Way. Now, they got an incredible bunch of supporters. They got sociologists, as if anybody gave a shit about them, and journalists, as if they actually existed, and authors, Nobel Prize winning physicists, politicians, environmental scientists. They got a little bit of everything, including Oxford professor. That's not a very good recommendation, man. You got Wade Allison down there, for God's sakes. I'd be ashamed to say I'm from Oxford. But anyway, they got all these people, and they were the whole Earth catalog, philosophers, ecologists. They really like the ecologists, I notice. In 2015, the group issued a manifesto. Remember that? We covered that. A critical climate mitigation technology is what they're calling nuclear. Cheap, clean, dense, and abundant. Too cheap to meter. My God, man. You should be ashamed for saying something like that there. So last year, renewable energy was the equivalent of, was 261 gigawatts, which is equal to 300 nuclear power plants worth of renewables came online last year. This year, and it's only the beginning of December, but we already got 290 gigawatts of renewables, which is the equivalent of 333 nuclear power plants in just 12 months. So in 24 months, we brought online 633 nuclear power plants worth of renewables. Give yourselves a big friggin' round of applause there, folks. And they estimate by 2026, it'll be equal to 5,500 nuclear power plants worth of renewables will be online. 5,500, which is equal to all nuclear and fossil fuel plants on the planet combined. We will surpass that in just 5 years' time. That is amazing news. So that probably accounts why we see nuclear panicking so much in the last number of years, right? And they're ramping up the panic each year around that corporation known as United Nations. You know, the ones that killed 3 million civilians in North Korea, that United Nations. And napalmed every community in North Korea, that United Nations. And now they've been stabbing them in, won't let them out of their country for 60 years, that United Nations. We make enemies, not friends, they say. A Breakthrough Institute, which is Michael Schellenberg's gig, staffer, Jessica Lovering followed this up with a series of policy papers identifying specific areas for actions to break the nuclear deadlock. She then went on to found 2 more left-leaning organizations, Energy for Growth and the feminist Good Energy Collective. They were what they do is they create these controlled opposition groups. You got this lot, we've called them out how many times over the years? A couple of hundred times anyway. Many of the leaders, experts, and spokes creeps of the nuclear leftists have been women. This wasn't completely new development, as Marie Curie. So the last story for the pre-Constipated Party 26 story by Schellenberger was where I first seen him put Marie Curie on a pedestal. We cover almost all of his media. And of course, Marie Curie, she lost both of her hands to radiation. Hey, Dana, she got 2 Nobel Prizes. Yeah, what would you rather have, a Nobel Prize or 2 hands? If your nuclear industry don't ask, I already know what your answer is. The arrival of a force of fierce female fission freedom fighters. So again, they got to point them as superheroes. And the political battlefield is having a real impact, reshaping the nuclear message. This is a advertising campaign. That's what Schellenberg excels at, right? These advertising campaigns. He'll write a book and do a circuit, and that's how he gets his kickback, his legitimate, his money laundering for lobbying, right? And people will buy 1,000 of his books as a kickback to him. A key role being the think tank known as the Third Way, and then he takes the money and uses it to create the Breakthrough Institute and people like, I don't even want to say her name, from the United Kingdom. I can't stand her. But nuclear power is carbon free. Xeon light, right? But you can't call nuclear carbon free, you weirdo. What if a nuclear power plant loses outside electricity? What are you talking about, Dana? Well, every nuclear power plant needs 2 external power supplies, usually coal because it's the cheapest, dedicated to just the nuclear power city, which they're like little cities, right? Nuclear power plants, as well as power plants in general, are not self-sufficient in terms of electricity. If a nuclear power plant loses outside electrical power, it needs backup or it'll melt down. So if they lose that one, they usually have a second one. And I can't tell the difference. That's nuclear, that's gas, and that's coal. I can't tell the difference. Nuclear power is carbon free. Of course it is. You dump it all into the ocean, and then you got nothing that anybody can point the finger at, right? Right? You know I'm right. Dump it in communities and everywhere else. Boil it like you done at 3 Mile Island for 2 years and release it into the environment. Absolute lunatics. It's a dirty bomb on steroids. Nuclear power is carbon free. I can't get over that, Dr. Robert Marsnut. If the party embraces nuclear power, it could support both economic growth and environmental necessities. Not all Democrats saw things that way, but some did. Thus was born the Third Way, another lobbying group, right? Similar fractions began to appear among center-left social democrats in Europe as well. And some hard-left groups, like the Irish Work Parties, have shifted their stances. The Irish Work Party. They're like the mob, where they take over unions and that, and then they get the unions to leverage their power in favor of evilness. To be sure, environmentalist leaders themselves have not changed their positions. The summer saw the spectacle of the Environment Defense Fund and the Natural Resource Defense Councils chairing the shutdown of New York State's Indian Point power plant. I was championing it too. It wasn't just them. Give me some credit sometimes. Why do they always get all the hate? What's wrong with hating on me? How nuclear kills fish, Indian Point. This is the plant they're talking about, by the way. This was a study done on it. These aging plants have a devastating impact on surrounding fish populations. Environmental analysts in the 2 states have found that these factories kill around 17 billion fish each year in New York and another 9 billion fish in New Jersey. There's some genocide machines, ecocide machines. There is strong evidence the decline in the fish stocks. This is all the different ways it kills, the single plant kills fish. There's also strong evidence that the decline in fish stocks along the entire northeast Atlantic seaboard is due more to the destructions of baby fish than the overfishing of adults by commercial fleets. I should have had that one in front of it. The Indian Point plant on the Hudson River sucks in 2.5 billion gallons of water each day and boils it off. Normally a glass of salt water has 1 billion creatures. 75 to 100 million of them are the phytoplankton, the basis of the food chain, the basis of the oxygen chain, the basis of the carbon sequestering chain per glass. A billion creatures. So there's 1 million gallons a minute going into each reactor to cool it and getting boiled to make power. So it boils 16 glasses times 1 billion creatures per glass times 1 million. Each minute in each of the reactors, 1,440 minutes a day. It kills about 2 billion juvenile mature fish a year in the screens or in the thermal plumes. That's another way it kills them. And the RC estimated also that 300 billion baby fish are killed each year, and they're sucked into the 40-foot wide intake pipes. So back to that story. In Europe, Greenpeace and the World Wildlife Fund are screaming bloody murder at the shift in the EU taxonomy to place nuclear in the charmed circle. Nuclear is not carbon-free or anything else. Nuclear is just pure evil. It's just evil. So, like, does this look like carbon-free green technology to anybody? You got abandoned your communities. You got 15,000 abandoned uranium mines. That's not a pond, by the way. That's chemicals, and that's evaporated into the community. Ends up in the water tables, and you can't drink the water around these places for 1,000 miles sometimes. They pollute the water tables with endless, absurd amounts of radiation just dumped into the ground with no lining and no plan to deal with it in the future in rusty tanks on top of that. All of these little dots are missile silos in communities. It's just a fraction of them, by the way. And each community is used as a human shield. And he's pro-nuclear as you get. Unbelievable, eh? He says, while the green fanatics can shout radiation danger as hard as they like, the fact of the matter is that not a single person in the solar system has ever been harmed, not a hair on their head, by radiation releases from any of the 1,000 or so pressurized water reactors that have operated on land and sea for the past 67 years. Haven't heard a single hair on a single head, it tells you. Human sex ratio at birth almost after atmospheric weapons testing. So the human sex ratio of male to female worldwide was changed because of nuclear testing. It's the same missiles you're going to use in a nuclear war. It's the same radioactive fallout in the nuclear war. And they got everybody convinced it's testing. So instead of shooting at each other, they just shot at themselves. And the radiation done the same job. Infant mortality after Chernobyl. By the way, 3 million children required treatments that's permanent from radiation illnesses because of Chernobyl. Many will die prematurely. United Nations Secretary General Kofi Annan in 2000, the United Nations podium. Pregnancy outcome in Sweden after the Chernobyl accident. Pregnancy outcome. Why'd you do a study in Sweden on pregnancy over Chernobyl? Dana, I don't know. Pregnancy outcome in Finland after Chernobyl. Another study, pregnancy outcome in Norway. Another study, legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. Another Chernobyl study, incidences of legal abortion in Sweden. 256 assessments of the influence of Chernobyl on birth defects and abortion rates in Austria. Chernobyl prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic. Fallout from Chernobyl accident, overall cancers incidences in Finland. Down syndrome time clusterings linked with the Chernobyl. Potential for disease initiation by a disease factory known as nuclear, by inhaled beta-emitting nuclear particles. And then you got to do the same thing for neutrons and gammas. And alphas, trends in the human sex odds of births in Europe after Chernobyl changed the sex ratio of everybody, every family in Europe. That's going to be true for animals and birds and insects. Global implications of Chernobyl. There's only Chernobyl, for God's sakes, we're talking about. By the way, in Chernobyl, they closed 9,000 farms in Ireland and Scotland and the United Kingdom because of Chernobyl fallout. And then you got Chernobyl fallout, prenatal mortality in England and Wales. And dental abnormalities in people living in radionuclide contaminated regions. So the whole country can have this dental, as you can see, like for the sex ratio worldwide studies and countrywide or just even community-wide, you can see that nuclear is nobody's friend at all, including them. If they got children, they shouldn't even be at it. Updated video study author now 20,000 excess U.S. deaths after Fukushima, not 14,000. And that was Jeanette Sherman. She died last year. We covered that. This is a little video of her.
My colleague, Joe Mangano, and I used only governmental data, that is by the U.S. government's EPA and CDC. And by comparing the deaths before Fukushima for 14 weeks and after Fukushima, and then expanding on the data, we found that there has been an increase in deaths in the United States. This has been corroborated by findings of deaths, particularly of children younger than 1 year in British Columbia.
Right. And infants' deaths were also up in BC, Canada. Collaborated U.S. study, which was her. And data showed a large spike in deaths, particularly infant deaths in the 14 weeks following the Fukushima meltdown. And Japan times 28 out of every 100 Fukushima pregnancies resulted in miscarriages or abortion. He said, of course, we didn't believe it, but a new study that came out in 2019, congenital heart disease operation rose 14% after Fukushima. It's open heart surgery for 14.2% per 100,000 live births. That's 14,200 children that have to have open heart surgeries when they're born, or they're going to have incredible illnesses and diseases. Which brings strong credence to that statement there, doesn't it? And by the way, 14.2% per 100,000, this is extraordinary. Pre-Fukushima, that's considered impossible. That's the whole country of Japan is like that, by the way, not just Fukushima. So in Japan, pre-Fukushima was 1 to 2 children per million would have thyroid tumors. Now it's 35%, which is 350,000 of a million when you scale it up. But it's 13,646, not out of a million, but out of 40,000. When it used to be 1 or 2 out of a million, now it's 13,600 plus out of 40,000. These are absurd numbers. You can expect the same thing in the animal, bird, and insect kingdom too. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram. And which is gamma, and they're only checking for gamma in the food. And so you're seeing these incredible illnesses in the children because these are absurd numbers, and the limit they got is 100 becquerels a kilogram, but they're not actually checking it. So Dr. Robert has sided with the devil. He's not going to Mars. Even if they do succeed and get someone to Mars, he's not going. And then he steps right behind a death cult known as nuclear. Well, that's good. Go ahead and do it, but don't come out and trick people and deceive people with writing the stories like you published. The current green anti-human movement hates humans. You hate humans, or you wouldn't back nuclear. And you're not stupid. And so you know different. And you know everything I'm saying is true. You already know it all. And I'm just saying for people, like, it's not like he's going to watch the video, but if you admire him, you have been misled. You have been deceived. You have been manipulated. He's one of the best. Very high concentrations of hot particles in the Pacific Northwest includes plutonium and americium. In fact, large radiation clouds, this was a continuous plume covering the planet at 1 million becquerels a square meter in that one. U.S. Department of Energy lab in the Pacific Northwest has declined to make the nuclear fallout results public after initially releasing the data. And the radiation data from the Seattle area survey were also withheld by the feds for national security purposes. Now, you paid them, you paid them in the government, you paid them, they work for you. You gave them the authority, you gave them the monetary, you gave them the education, the whole 9 yards, the equipment to tell you when something happens. When it finally happens, they're like, no, we don't work for you, we're the government. Unprecedented spike. Think of the word unprecedented. Look it up in a dictionary. 1,500 atoms of sulfur peroxide hydrogen buckyballs per cubic meter of air detected in California. Sustained. California nuke plant detected 4,000% more iodines than the U.S. UC University of California, Berkeley during Fukushima peak. Yeah, Berkeley, I got a whole folder on evilness from Berkeley. Radioactive plume contaminated the entire northern hemisphere in a short period of time. Then went north to Oregon, Washington, Canada. Cesium levels in the northern California soil hit post-Fukushima peak. UC Berkeley blames nuclear weapons testing 50 years ago. Rain with 20 million particles of radioactive iodine-131 per liter fell on the U.S. during post-Fukushima peak. So it can't be just iodine-131, right? The biggest byproduct is curium isotopes. California iodine-131 probably double or triple what they reported. Portland area topsoil was 8,000 picocuries a kilogram of cesium from Fukushima. 10,000% higher than the levels found by UC Berkeley. Yeah, Berkeley was super evil during all of it, and even today. Amount of radiation of 3 gallons of milk from Hawaii surpasses your annual maximum contaminant levels set by the EPA. There is no safe level. It's man-made anthropogenic radiation. There is no safe levels. Arkansas melt 300% above, and the EPA, demonic EPA, the lunatic EPA, the inbreeding going on down there now. I'm sure if you've done DNA tests at EPA, there'd be nothing there in the DNA that resembles humans. Maximum containment levels for radioactive iodine. Again, they use the iodine constantly to deceive you. For every iodine-131, there's 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine-129. Iodine-132, 133 are 10 times more effective at ionizing and radiating your thyroid glands in animals and birds and insects as thyroid glands than the iodine-131, which is incredibly effective. And for every iodine created, there's 1,000 other fission products is going to be in the same sample. Fukushima fallout in New Hampshire at 12,000 atoms per square meter. Latest forecast is all of California on a radiation threat. And that was the model covering the whole planet. But yeah, California is obviously getting hit, and so is the entire planet. That's the Pacific Ocean to your left and the Atlantic Ocean to your right. This model only goes up until just a short while, as you can see. Hot particles in Seattle at 50% of the level of sea in Tokyo latches onto the lungs. New York Times contributor confirms California rainwater 181 times above the drinking water standards. Radioactive fallout and rain was 10 times more than originally reported on top of that. Iodine 131 Pennsylvania rainwater was 3,300% above the drinking water standards. And San Francisco was 18,000% above the federal drinking water standards. Air in New York was 3,400 of iodine gas. Wow. Tends to concentrate in the testicles. Yay, dear mom. 360 plus atoms of radioactive sulfur, hydrogen peroxide buckyballs per day inhaled by Californians. And so does that mean the women didn't inhale it, Dana? No. If that's how much sequestered in your testicles, how much sequestered into your kidneys and your liver and your lungs and your organs and your muscles and your bones is a terrifying question. What other isotopes were in those samples, Dana? Indeed. The new nuclear moment. Way to go, Dr. Robert. You just took up a whole show. You sack of shit. You despicable piece of shit. You disgusting parasite. You maggot. You incredibly educated parasite. You educated monster. That's what we call an educated monster. He told nothing but lies for the whole friggin' story. Nothing but lies. I'm just ashamed to be a human right now. That piece of shit lives on the same planet. If you ever get a flight to go to Mars, you should stick him up in the bow somewhere and take him with you. We don't want him on this planet. He's not welcomed. Strong quake jolts area near Mount Fuji, Osaka, and no reports of damage. And so they'll always do that, right? Before any reports come out, they'll put out that headline. It's a packaged headline. It's a garbage can diagnosis, basically, of the earthquake. First quake occurred around 6:30 a.m., registering a lower 5, not a 5.1 or 5.2 or 5.3 or 5.4, but a lower 5 on a Japanese scale, intensity scale is 7. So if you divide 7 into 10, you get 1.428, blah, 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 blah. So 1.428 is 1.43. And then when you do the math, you end up with 6.14. Oh, I'm sorry, that's in some areas of Tokyo, it was a 4. So say a 4.3 is 6. And then a 5.4, a lower 5, is a 7.7 on the Richter scale, which is a great scale. So when you look at the shaking, see, but the problem is when it comes to this industry, they'll lie every step of the way. It was 18 kilometers, a very shallow earthquake. Now there's a problem. The reason that we're worried about it is because it's Japan. The buildings are very unstable. You can have another radioactive plume come in. The government estimated there was a 70-80% chance of a magnitude 8 or 9 earthquake occurring along the Nankai Trough within 30 years, with some projections saying it would trigger a tsunami 30 meters high and result in deaths of 300,000 people. About 600 households in the Yamanashi prefecture experienced electricity outage. And Mount Fuji is an active volcano with a history of major eruptions, some 180 over the past 560 years. 180 over the past 5,600 years. Just once every 30-something years. Earthquake buries homes under landslide in Hokkaido, Japan. I'll take you all the way back to 2016. Now, in 2016, when they reported on the earthquake, they called it a 6.6 quake. But you had to hunt to find out whether it was on the international scale, the Richter scale, or was it on the Japanese seismic intensity scale. And so, here's some pictures of it. Is it a 6.6 on the Japanese scale, or the international scale, or a 6.6 on the Japanese scale? So you had some slides, Dana. Actually, you had absurd amount of mountains that lost both sides of the mountain sliding. Look at that. So when a couple of years later, the 2018 quake was 6.7 on a maximum intensity scale of 7. It actually dropped all the mountains for a very big distance. On all sides of the mountains had landslides. Have you ever seen anything like that before? So the big problem is if there's a nuclear power plant close by, there was 130 aftershocks, and register 6.7 on the Japanese scale of 7, which is a 9.5 earthquake. 9.5 earthquake. Oh, I did do the math. 31. So, look at this. You can imagine if there's a nuclear power plant anywhere near that place. So when you look it up, there's the nuclear power plant in Hokkaido Island. And there, the red X is where the earthquake was too. And that was a 9.5 on the international scale. And that's where the nuclear plant is. That's where the earthquake was, just around 25 miles away. So why wasn't a big deal made about this? Have you ever seen an earthquake that dropped mountains before? Have you ever seen pictures like that where all the mountains had landslides on both sides of the mountains? That's pretty amazing, right? And those landslides are massive. Look at these things. So you always got to be worried, because Japan had been doing this for quite a few years, where that never got acknowledged as a 9.5. That was only acknowledged as a 6.6. And you had to search for a long time. I think it was 30-something newspapers, articles, before we finally found out that it was on the Japanese scale. Those pictures didn't show up till later. They hid it away, right? Because they had a nuclear power plant there. The nuclear power plant shut down. It was like 4 million people with no power. And they were like, no, it's just an earthquake. Japan has thousands every year. Go back to sleep. Pure quakes, though, on the weekend shakes Japan, prompts fear of more seismic activity. Well, they're waiting for this thing to go bang, and Japan is starting to open up reactors. They got fuel stored all over the place close to these things. A 5.9 quake, which is an 8.4. They said there was no damage, but there actually was. You can see the water flowing from these places. There was a house caught fire. While no one was killed, a convulsion reignited fears of a giant quake that could see the capital, Tokyo, left in ruins. In 2013, the government issued a report predicting there will be a 70% chance of a magnitude 7 earthquake striking the capital region. Now, the Fukushima earthquake was offshore on the tectonic plates. So the tectonic plates had let go. It was like 180 miles. And this created a 680 kilometer tsunami when it struck the coastline at around 600 miles per hour. It slows down pretty quickly, but Going inland, it was over 100 miles per hour. When the quakes have taken place this morning, sits on the plate boundaries and is a very seismically active area. Mount Fuji is due for its next blast, and the last eruption was in 1707. If the iconic mountain erupts, volcanic ash could travel past Tokyo all the way to Chiba and paralyze the capital, surrounding areas, blackouts, water shortages, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, nasty stuff in it. He said it will definitely happen, likely during our lifetime. Chernobyl's air is now 40% less radiated with novel technology. I was like, this is fantastic. This is amazing. This is a dream come true. Get your ass down to the United Kingdom. I got 9,000 farms closed because of Chernobyl. Decreasing radiation in normal levels is now possible in 5 years instead of 24,000. Well, there's not less radiation in Chernobyl's air, by the way. It's a despicable public relation campaign. And interesting engineering is goblins from the nuclear industry on top of that. What they done was, allegedly, they're still, I'm not able to figure out what the technology is. I don't know if someone goes out there and waves a friggin' wand or what. Chernobyl air, what they done was, they done allegedly an experiment on a hectare, 2.5 acres of soil. It was radioactive. And he brought it back to normal almost, and that the air was 40% less radioactive where it's ongoing nuclear meltdowns. And so the whole thing is a Ponzi scam, just like we see with the uranium stocks all the time. They're basically trying to get people to invest into this company. Reducing radiation in the soil and the air in Chernobyl. And so they don't tell us what the technology, whether it's a liquid or a spray or electrolysis, and it's kind of like there's no evidence. When you go look at, he's got a book out, Grounds for Freedom, Saving Chernobyl. Like if this was a winner, we would have some documentation on it, telling us how it's done and blah, 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 blah. They'd be bragging about it, right? Instead, it's the complete opposite. They said he had to fight, he didn't speak English, he had to fight greed and jealousy and rancor to develop technology that safely cleans radiation-scarred sites like Chernobyl. Transforms hydraulic power and boosts the nutrition levels of trees and upends human understanding of physics, energy, nature, and life as we know it. Well, I think we all learned something here today. Not on this story, but the rest of it. That story we learned nothing. I'll be keeping an eye on it. I hope it's true, but it doesn't look that way to me. Iran explosion. You see all the headlines the weekend? Mysterious explosion in the air around Iran. Iran is just practicing self-defense around the nuclear sites. And then, because Israel, we know, blew up 2 different reactors over the years. And they weren't running, but that didn't... It won't stop them from causing a nuclear wasteland down there. That'd be right in their, up their alley. They can blame it on... Russia has pushed to mine the Arctic metals is fueled by nuclear power. And Russia, of course, got endless dumps. Absurd amount of dumps. In the Arctic was 17,000, 18,000 nuclear dumps in the ocean. Could Taiwan's political left reconsider nuclear power? So you see this desperation constantly lately, the last number of months. And of course, Taiwan, as we talked about earlier, they have Orchard Island, where they told natives that lived there that they displaced and moved them out there. and then went out there and told me they want to build a canning factory for salmon when it was actually a nuclear dump. A nuclear dump. What are you doing over there? Oh, it's a canning factory for salmon. Oh, that's great. Talk about how evil do you got to be to do something like that, by the way. Japanese region struggled to export farm products to Taiwan. Remember that story, 2018? You know, we're talking about Taiwan, right? Because it was politics was brought into it. First off, there really is a nuclear meltdown. And I tell you to ask those two guys, but they would have died that day with their paper suits on, spraying reagents on fuel pellets. They got 60 million one-ton bags picked up in farmland where they kept growing. They never stopped growing food, by the way. And they never started picking up bags till 2 years later. Some local governments in Japan are struggling to export their agricultural products to Taiwan, as Taipei is expected to conduct a referendum on whether or not to lift the ban on imports from 5 Japanese prefectures. There's actually 14, all northern prefectures from Chiba all the way north. Fukushima residents visit family graves every 7 years. They never stopped growing food in Fukushima. Chiba Prefecture in eastern Japan, which is one of 5 prefectures, 20 kilometers away from Tokyo, 200 kilometers away from Fukushima, was also hit by the ban. So the food from Chiba, right next to Tokyo, 200 kilometers from the nuclear meltdown, is still banned in Taiwan. And Fukushima, Ibaraki, Tochigi, and Guma, all north of Tokyo. You know, because there's 60 million one-ton bags picked up already. That much was dumped into the rivers and the coastline also. Chiba government last year met with one of the mayors in Taiwan, and 2 people agreed that local sweets made from peanuts harvested in Chiba should be made available in Taiwan. Well, we can't sell it anywhere else. People won't eat radiation. Come on, take it into Taiwan. You don't like the people in Taiwan. Now, if Dr. Robert was in charge, we'd be like, yeah, we'll sell that in Taiwan. Will it kill babies quick? Oh, yeah, okay, let's sell it in Taiwan. 30 million tons of radioactive waste. It's actually 60 million, been updated. As Chen is said to be close to Taiwan president, an individual who accompanied the governor told the scumbag media, the 2 leaders had a fairly in-depth discussion towards lifting the ban. So 2 people can shake hands and poison tens of millions of people. That doesn't worry you today? That should worry the shit out of you. At the agricultural festival earlier this year, the Chiba government was not allowed to bring in food samples because of an import ban. Thank goodness somebody got a brain on their shoulders. Officials only had a video and a panel explaining the safety of the agricultural products in Chiba. We want the ban to be lifted as soon as possible, said the murderer. So he wouldn't go down there and stand up there with the microphone and say, we want the ban lifted, our food is safe. Fukushima also wants to resume exports of peaches. I'll actually still, even today, I won't eat peaches, which are the biggest overseas market for the fruit before the nuclear accident. Well, first off, this is Japan. They're growing food right by the bags of nuclear waste. And you're a racist if you say that that could be radioactive. The radioactive fallout from the TEPCO power plant contaminated a large swath of land, you know, like planet Earth. Near, well, this is France's model of the radioactive fallout from venting. Oh me, oh my, I heard me woman say, the facility and planet Earth. There is a planet Earth. Ibaraki Prefecture government also sees Taiwan as a promising market for its agricultural items. So they're picking up bags non-stop, but they didn't stop growing food there. They kept growing food when the meltdown, and they gave farmers gamma counters, Geiger counters, that just look at gamma radiation. And they told the farmers, if it's over 500 counts a minute, don't sell it. Or mix it with clean food to get it below 500 becquerels a kilogram. So they didn't look for neutrons, plutonium, and uranium, and blah, 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 curium, lethal isotopes. And don't get me wrong, gamma is nasty, brutal, deadly too. They didn't look for beta, they just looked for gamma. And he said, okay, go ahead and ship it. 2 years later, or a year later, they said they were going to reduce the level from 500 becquerels a kilogram, and they're only looking at cesium, by the way, to 100 becquerels a kilogram. And he said it's going to take 6 months to make that transition when he announced it. This is the definition of monsters, of pure evil. Every facet of nuclear, they try to outdo themselves constantly to be more evil. Every day they're just a little bit more evil. And there's no need of it. Taiwan ranked fourth among overseas markets for Japanese farms and food products last year, importing 83 billion yen. 83 billion yen is almost a billion Canadian. It's like $5 in America or something. So the dirty bastards poison all kinds of people, millions of people in Taiwan, to make a lousy $1 billion. Hong Kong is the number one importer, followed by the United States. The United States is already importing lots of your radiation. Why should you import your radioactive food too? Because that's a plutonium or neptunium-239, which decays into plutonium-239. Taiwan is not alone in blocking the Japanese agricultural products from entering the domestic markets. And it wasn't until July this year that Hong Kong lifted its ban on agricultural items from 4 Japanese prefectures, but still kept its door closed to Fukushima product. And a couple of weeks back, September 21st, United States FDA lifted the Japanese import restrictions, all of them. Oh, so did the EU the day before. And they also started bragging that Iceland, Norway, and 2 other non-EU countries will also make a similar rule change. The staggering thing about that statement was that Western media didn't report on this. So that's 6 weeks or 5 weeks later. Western media, Canada, United States, still not reported that the United States has lifted all import restrictions on lethal food from a nuclear wasteland. Farmers in areas affected by the nuclear disaster made efforts to reduce radiation, including the use of potassium to prevent the absorption of radioactive cesium from the fallout. This is madness. So if you put cesium or potassium in your fields, like the plant can't handle any more potassium than it already is genetically designed for. But radiation bioaccumulates in it. There's nothing you can add to it to stop it. And so this lie doesn't show up a lot, but 20 to 30 times a year, where the farmers are claiming that they got potassium in their fields, and that stops it from absorbing cesium, as if cesium is the only isotope. This is just madness. It's madness. The whole story is just, what's wrong with these people? Well, they're a death cult. Ask Dr. Robert. That was too easy. Hang on, here we go. Here's a good one for you. Oh, a little bit too much sometimes, isn't it? You need a bit of a help. So, curium, by the way, is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod, and you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. And we learned that from Dr. Raymond Gilmeddy's Beagle Dog and Beagle Puppy murder side. So each one of those acronyms up there has all kinds of daughters. So the curium isotopes, you can see all the daughters that it has. So if you look at iodine 129, like stuff from the solar system, the oceans total, pre-nuclear age, the oceans had approximately 100 kilograms. Various nuclear-related activities, nuclear weapons testing, fuel reprocessing, Chernobyl, etc., dumping, but more than an order of magnitude. Which have, the time of La Hague in France and Sellafield have discharged approximately 1,640 kilograms into the English Channel and 720 kilograms into the Irish Sea. And then after Fukushima, you can see there was 220 million atoms of iodine 129, which is like one of the iodine 131, iodine 132, 133, iodine 129. There's 31 of them produced for every iodine 131. And you can see these numbers hitting North America. It would have been saturated with all the other isotopes. So iodine isotopes, there's many of them, see? It's not just iodine 131 or xenon 133. And so each of those acronyms, now there's estimated to be 12,000 or so isotopes that are, what's the word for it? Are top secret. There's not a word for it. Anyway, I can't remember off the top of my head. The military, anyway, has created a lot of isotopes we don't even acknowledge. Help Wanted ad seeks employees able to carry out a conversation. Well, that sounds like a job for me. I could probably get a job there. And they're going to give you a paper suit, get you radiated and kick you loose, tell you to pick up your check in a few weeks, and you'll die before you get to it. Isotopes of krypton, Superman isotopes and all their daughters, uranium and all their daughters, plutonium isotopes and all their daughters, americium all their daughters, neptunium and their daughters, cesium and their daughters, strontium and all their daughters. So each of those acronyms, you got to worry about all the daughters. So when you talk about cesium, when you talk about iodine, it doesn't. There's many different iodines. There's many different strontiums that you got to be worried about. So when you hear cesium, remember, for every cesium, there's a 90 strontium or 100 strontium 90s created. No radioactive material was detected in food items, they claimed. This is absurdness because it's still hemorrhaging out. It doesn't go away. Where did it all go? It doesn't disappear. And the Vogtle nuclear power plants need an extra $1 billion. Need an extra $1 billion every couple of months, I notice. Where's the numbers? So that's 28.7 billion, not counting the 3.68 billion, which is $32 billion. $32 billion, and they're 6 years behind schedule or something. The company has repeatedly been demonstrated to be unrealistic and unreliable. Yeah, it was supposed to be finished in 2012, 9 years ago. The original cost was 14 billion, it's 32 billion now. That's nuclear for you. 100% reliable to rob you and destroy you and murder you. That's nuclear, baby. That's nuclear for you. So how did the poll go tonight, everybody? We get a poll out there tonight. Did we get a few clicks on it tonight? 32 votes. 88% said nuclear scientists' parents should be jailed for creating monsters. And an amazing 12% don't think nuclear scientists' parents should be jailed. Party poopers. Like some of these polls, when I do that, it's just meant to have that conversation. Like who gets the blame for creating monsters? Because their parents probably, if nuclear scientists' parents worked in nuclear industry, should they be jailed for creating monsters? Well, they should be jailed for 10 years. Soon as their kid says they want to work in the nuclear industry, jailing parents for mandatory 10 years, hard labor, and then maybe they won't become work in the nuclear industry. Nuke, how Project Plowshare considered the use of nuclear explosives. They actually wanted to detonate nuclear weapons across America and make a channel as a short cross, but then they decided to do the Panama Canal. The United States called the program Peaceful Nuclear Explosions. And they were maniacs, man. They done so much above ground testing, it became a tourist attraction in Las Vegas. Remember that stories? You can get stamps and postcards now of it, right? More than 500 above ground tests were conducted in Nevada. The devastating power of atomic weapon was known not just from tests, but from the actual use on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You would never say it. In fact, the studies done on Hiroshima and Nagasaki is the bar they use for radiation criteria. They only studied external doses. They never studied internal doses. And there's a lot of revolting scumbags we know now, all these years later, that work on those projects, right? Like Geraldine Thomas in the United Kingdom. And Robert Gale, and there's a bunch of these incredible degenerates. They're gonna atomic bombs to blast a new canal across Central America. They're crazies, eh? They're gonna use 250 nuclear weapons and 27 separate detonations, ranging from 1 to 11 megatons each. The smallest one was 1 megaton, 1,000 kilotons. These are this is madness. Taking less time and costing less than was spent to build the San Francisco Bay Bridge. Yeah, they had 50,000 nuclear weapons at one time. Pakistan nuclear plant. NASA wants to put a reactor on the moon. China's mystery hypersonic nuclear weapon can stay in orbit for extended periods of time. Measuring the speed of sound and dense nuclear matter. They take all this money, equipment, academics, and they waste their time on this instead of fixing some of the problems that they already created. This is what we see over and over. They create all these problems, you just walk away. They go off and set up another organization. A nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. If I was in the Middle East, I'd be doing everything I can to get my hands on a nuclear weapon to keep the monsters away from me. There you go. International Energy Agency sees renewables overtaking fossil fuels and nuclear by 2026. A record volume of renewable energy is expected to come online in 2021 with 290 gigawatts of new capacity, and that surpasses 2020 record of 261. And 290 gigawatts is equal to 333 nuclear power plants. Surpasses the 2020 record when renewables accounted for all the new electricity capacity installed worldwide. So last year, the only thing came online last year was renewables. And a lot of it, 300 nuclear power plants worth of renewables came online last year. Wow. And so gas, coal, and nuclear shrunk on top of that. It didn't just plateau, it actually shrunk. This year's record renewable electricity additions of 290 gigawatts are yet another sign that a new global energy economy is emerging. I'll say, well, that's 633 nuclear plants worth of renewables in 24 months. The agency said, and I just showed you a story about a power plant that was supposed to be finished in 2012. It's still not finished. And instead of being 14 billion, it's 32, almost 33 billion. No end in sight. The agency said between 2020 and 2026, renewables will grow by another 60% to over 4,800 gigawatts, which is the capacity of all the fossil fuels nuclear power plants combined, which is equal to 5,500 nuclear power plants of renewables in the next 5 years will come online. Wow, man. Kill nuclear, kill it now, get rid of it now. It's holding us up. Kill it and kill it now. Piece of shit nuclear. And not only that, if they got some issues, the government addresses the issues. The growth of renewables between now and 2026 could be a quarter bigger. Could be a quarter bigger. Which, another 1,400. So almost 7,000 nuclear power plants can come online with a little bit of help by 2026. But at least at the current rate, and this is the slowdown is because of the coronavirus, right? Which is the radioactive fallout making everybody sick worldwide. International Energy Agency sees renewables overtaking fossil fuels and nuclear by 2026. Now, that's a pretty good story. Hell, that's a great story, Dana. I'll just end on that story, because that's a great one to end on. The poll got up to 34 votes, 88%. Says yes, nuclear scientists' parents should be jailed for creating a monster. I don't mean actually jail the parents. If you want to, I'm game. I'm with you. I'm still with you. I'm just saying, who do we blame for all these monsters? Who should we hold accountable? Should they at least get $1,000 fine for having creating a monster? Because you got to accept, though, first that nuclear scientists are monsters. And if you hang around here for a couple of shows, I got you. You're mine. Night, everybody. Port Angeles. Robert, Dana, Organic Slant. Thank you again. Good night, everyone. P Swerve. Yeah, good night, everybody. Have a great night. Great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody hopefully tomorrow night. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Not that I give a shit anyway. Put me in your bookmarks so you can find me later. I notice everybody's saying they're being unsubscribed. When they check, they're actually unsubscribed from this new channel. We've only been up a couple of months. I'm getting 40 people on the live show. If I was wrapping excrement on a stick for fertilizer, I'd probably have 30, 40,000 here. Don Vincent, I only serve one king. Good night, everybody. Ted, there's a quick shout out to everybody. Comment, everybody's sitting at home. Hi to everybody sitting at home. 239 Giant. Hi, Joe. That's Joe Moore. Joe's actually been on television fighting the nuclear industry. He was poisoned in Rocky Flats as a kid. Once you go anti-nuclear, you never go back. Unless you're a double agent like Xeon Light in the United Kingdom, who was the spokesperson for Extinction Rebellion, and then she turncoated on him and joined the public and came out publicly as a public relation firm with Environmental Progress, Michael Schellenberg. Ooh, well, we made it this far. That was pretty good, I thought. Colette S., good night. Radioactive Banana. Yeah, I got the Paul Tippy. I'm pretty censored, that's for sure. They took down my other site with 24,000 subscribers. It's been impossible to recover. And it's such a coward thing to do to someone like me. I was out on a research expedition counting insects 450 kilometers away from home when they took down my YouTube site with 1,600 presentations on it. Timeless Truth. And so 10 years of research yanked out from under me. No strikes, no emails, no reply. Mike Mansfield, James Lucid, it's bye-bye Japan, yeah. Chad, Ella. Oh, we had lots of people here tonight. Human Love, thank you, everybody. Kroll. Yeah, I should have went to baby pictures. No, I decided not to, actually, when I was building the presentation this evening. Well, looks like we got through it, didn't we? Once again, there's a lot of work goes into these shows, and then you got to sit there and actually do the show. Takes all day to put everything together, line everything up. You got 89% says scientists, parents should be jailed for creating monsters. That's fantastic. It's a great poll. Wait for the poll to pop up. Night to everybody sitting around watching this tonight, tomorrow, later. Hugs for you and your friends, your loved ones. And have a great night. A great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Yeah, Xeon Lights is a piece of shit, I know. God bless everybody. Hugs for everybody. I'll see everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night.